Hello everyone, and welcome back to part 2 for our small video series. Just as a small recap, in the previous episode, we went ahead and constructed a custom-made engine cover for our Ford Mustang. And with this process, we went ahead and glued 3 pieces together and then made it look like it was all one piece using some fiberglass as well as some body filler. And then we went ahead and primed it and cleared it so it looks like one perfect part. And this is how it turned out. So now from here, we can go ahead and construct a mold. So let's get started. And for our very first step, we're going to go ahead and use some aluminum flashing just to create a flange around the plug for our mold. And this process is pretty simple, but it is very time consuming. But we're just going to cut out one piece at a time by using some sheet metal cutters, and we'll attach it with some hot glue. So now that we have the aluminum flashing attached, we'll go and grab some resin tape, and we're going to go tape up all the seams where all these pieces meet together. We just want to make sure it flows nicely together and there's no air gaps. So now that the outer flange is complete, let's go ahead and plug up all these holes. So I have some spare aluminum flashing. I went ahead and cut in some rectangles. Now I'm going to go ahead and hot glue every one of these into place. And now for our next step, we just need to refine where our flange material meets the plug. So I'm going to pick up the camera. So right there in this little area, you can see where there's a little bit of an air gap. That needs to be addressed, because if not, the gel coat will create like a mechanical fasten. So we're going to go ahead and use this fillet clay right here. Some people use wax, but this clay was very easy to come by. And I'm going to go ahead and cut a strip right off of this, or a little block off. Now they did kind of pre-cut it, but I'm going to take some fishing line just to get a nice chunk out of it. And at least try to. Come on. And there we go. And that should be plenty to go ahead and do this one plug. And then we'll work our way back to the front. I'm going to go ahead and peel a little bit off this block and then just start stuffing it right between where the plug meets the flange. And we want to fill this in. We want to make sure this is nice and seamless and it flows very nicely between the two pieces. And it's a little bit hard to work with at first, but the more you work with it, the easier it gets. And just to see what we got left over, yeah, we got a good enough amount for another project. That's awesome. And the real good part is the gel coat won't stick to this clay. And now we can start moving forward and start applying our mold release agents. And the first thing we're going to apply is our paste wax. This is very similar to car wax, but this is better for making molds. And the first thing I'm going to do is put a nice hefty amount on applicator pad. At least try to. Yeah, there we go. And we'll start little by little buffing that right into our plug, kind of a wax on method. And you want to go ahead and put the wax on the plug, buff it in really nicely, and then we'll go ahead and remove it within a minute using a microfiber cloth. And we're going to do this 3 times. We want to make sure this is coated very nicely and it's going to end up very smooth. And that concludes our third coat. Looks like it came out pretty good, nice and smooth. So now we can focus on our next mold release application, and we have film number 10 right here. This is pretty common, very easy to work with. And we're gonna go apply it using a foam brush and a cup. You can go ahead and use a spray gun, which we'll do in the next video, or you can go ahead and use a paper towel. But for now, I'm just gonna show a very easy way, just using a foam brush. So I'm gonna put a very little amount in a cup, and then we'll go ahead and apply very thin coats to our plug and our flange. And you want to make this very, very thin, so if you see any air bubbles, just keep brushing it out. You want it as thin as possible. And we're going to do this 3 times, waiting 45 minutes between coats. And after applying our last coat, we went ahead and waited an hour just to make sure it's completely dry. You can always tell it's dry because it has a nice beautiful shine, and you can probably even touch a corner just to make sure it's no longer tacky. So anytime you do coats, you can wait even longer than 45 minutes. You just need to make sure it's dry. And other than that, it looks pretty good. I don't see any issues. Let's keep moving forward. So now this is where the real fun begins. And the first step we're going to do as far as making our mold is we're going to use this tooling gel coat. And this is great because the tooling gel coat is a little bit stronger than normal gel coat. It's great for molds. And of course we have our MEKP, which is our hardener. And we'll go ahead and set that aside. And now go ahead and grab an eyedropper as well. This is going to be used to measure the hardener. And then we have a mixing stick. Now when using this gel coat or any of this resin, make sure you use a respirator. It's very important. This stuff is very potent. And I'm going to put a little bit of extra in my mixing cup just because I'm not sure how much I need. And then we'll go ahead and add our hardener. We're going to need about 1.5% for this particular setup, but for some you may have to vary it, but this one's 1.5, and I'm using an eyedropper just to get the exact amount. And then we're going to go ahead and stir it for 1 minute just to make sure that hardener's definitely mixed in. So now let's work our way to the part and start applying our tooling gel coat. And I'm going to go ahead and use a fine brush and start applying nice thin coats. You can do this with a spray gun if you'd like, which I'll do in the next episode. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and use a brush. I'm going to have to do 2 coats because this stuff is very runny and it's very hard to build up on these vertical sides. And now let's take a step back and see how it looks. So this is still wet. We just finished applying the gel coat, and looking at it, it does look pretty rough. You can still see some of the brush strokes, but that's perfectly fine. It's going to look good on the other side. This side, it doesn't really matter. And so far, it's looking pretty good. Looks like we got a good thickness.
The next day.
And after letting this sit overnight, let's take a look. So far, it looks pretty good. I don't see any cracking or any wrinkles. Usually when it's cracking when it's too thick of a coat, or it wrinkles when it's too thin. And I was kind of worried because this is actually starting to get really hot when I was applying it. It looks like I may have added a little too much hardener, but not to worry. I think we can go ahead and address that later if there's any issues. And since the gel coat's nice and hardened up, I can go ahead and cut away all my fiberglass matting. And I'm going to start with my fiberglass tissue mat. This is really ultra thin stuff. It's great for our first layer. And I'm just cutting away a few slits in a few areas just to make it easier on me when I start applying it. And we're going to start our layup with our fiberglass using polyester resin. It's very inexpensive and easy to work with. And I'm going to put about 12 ounces in a container just to start off with. And let's see if I can pour the right amount. And again, use a respirator. This stuff is also very potent. And it looks about the right amount. Use my eyedropper to get the exact amount of hardener I need. And that looks about right. And again, we're going to stir for 1 minute. Want to make sure that hardener is nice and mixed in well. And now we can work our way to the gel coat, and I'm going to apply a nice thin coat of this resin just to saturate it. It's usually good practice to go ahead and put a little bit of resin under your fiberglass before laying it down. But with a tissue, you don't have to, but I'm just going to do it for this particular mold. And now we begin our fiberglass layup. And I'm going to start with that tissue matting. It's really good as a first layer because it gets in the nooks and crannies and gets all those little details and air bubbles out. So I'm going to use a chip brush and go ahead and stab it with my resin and use a roller to help flatten it out. And we're going to repeat this process until all the air bubbles are out and this thing looks completely transparent. So far, this is coming out looking really good. This is very promising. Now we can go ahead and move up to heavier matting. So I'm going to move up to my 3/4 ounce fiberglass and go ahead and repeat the exact same process. So now let's go ahead and take a step back and look at our progress. Looking at this so far, it looks like this turned out really good. I'm not really seeing any issues. The fact I could see the gel coat popping through all this fiberglass is a great sign. I don't see really any air bubbles. It looks like we flattened this out very nicely. So let's go ahead and keep steaming forward and we'll go ahead and add some heavier matting.
8 hours later.
So after letting that resin just harden up just a little bit, we're going to go ahead and pull out our nice heavy fiberglass matting. And this is 1.5 ounce. This is really thick stuff. I have a whole roll of it. So I'll go ahead and do the same thing as earlier. We'll mix up some polyester resin, but this time just a hair more. And I'll apply a nice thin coat of that resin just to kind of help saturate it when I go ahead and start laying it down. So that completes my first layer. Now I'm going to lay down a second layer of the same 1.5 ounce matting. Now I typically want to do 2 layers at a time just to give it time for that resin to harden up a little bit.
The next day. The next day.
So now that we finished our fiberglass layup, now let's go ahead and construct a mold brace. Now I'm doing this 2 reasons. One, to help kind of brace this so it keeps it from wobbling, as well as it's going to act as legs, so it's going to make it easier when making the actual parts later on. And I'm going to use my contour gauge. This is really cool to have, especially on a project like this. And all you got to do is just lay it down against the surface you want to cut, and that looks about right. So I got the shape I want, and I want to go ahead and bring it to some foam board. And I'm going to go ahead and trace it out right on this foam board. Alright, so there is one side right there. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side as well. Trace that out with my marker. And yep, that looks about right. Now let's go ahead and take some scissors, and I'm going to go ahead and cut out the same shape on a foam board. The whole idea is if I can get the shape right on this foam board, then I can go ahead and trace it out on a piece of wood. And that looks close enough. And we'll do a test fit. Yeah, it looks pretty good right there. And I'll do the same thing on the rear as well. Yep, looks pretty good. And then I'll go ahead and take some MDF board. Go ahead and saw this one in half. I just went ahead and bought one board. It's a 4-foot board by 12 inches. And this is going to work great for this particular project. And now that we have 2 equal pieces, I'll grab the foam board from earlier. Go ahead and place it right in the center, and we'll go ahead and trace out that exact shape we need. Now, I do want to apologize in advance. I was trying out a new camera this week, and it's very blurry. The autofocus kind of sucks. So for a few pieces of footage in this video, you're going to see some bad camera footage. I do apologize, but after the brace is done, it should clear right up. And now that we have our wood all marked up, let's go ahead and cut it out using a jigsaw. And I'm going to go ahead and try to cut along the line as best I can. And now let's go ahead and check our fitting. So far everything looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and connect these 2 together. So I'm going to cut out a block of wood, or at least 2 of them. And I'll go ahead and piece these together. That way it adds a little bit of stability and it keeps it somewhat straight. And for now I'm using wood clamps just to hold it in place until I can go ahead and screw them together. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to set that right to the left. And I'm going to start drilling some pilot holes. So I'll get my drill bit. And come on. Alright, yep, looks like I got it dead center. So there's one, and I'll go ahead and drill in a screw. And almost there. I'm trying to go easy on it. A little bit more. And, yep, that looks pretty good. So let's get number 2, number 3, and number 4. And the opposite sides I already did off camera because you don't need to see that. You already know the process. And now let's go ahead and pick up our brace and put it back. I went ahead and marked it where the exact spots were, so it should line up. And then we can go ahead and attach it right to our mold. So I'm going to use the same process we did earlier. I'm going to take some polyester resin, and then I'm going to take some matting, and I'm going to use the thick matting. I'm going to use the 1.5 ounce. And I'm going to go ahead and saturate the area first, and then lay down the matting, kind of like little band-aids. So I'm going to add a few spots, start dabbing it down with my chip brush, and we'll flatten it out with a roller. And I'm going to do about 2 layers of this matting, just to provide a little extra support and strength. And I'm going to do this on the inside and outside of the wood, just to make sure we have all our bases covered, as well as to make sure this is very strong.
The next day.
And now that the resin hardened up enough overnight, we're going to go ahead and grab that same film number 10, that mold release agent, and go and apply a nice thin coat just to seal this mold. All the polyester resin we were using is a unwaxed or a non-waxed resin, which means you need to remove this out of the air for it to fully cure. So to do this, we're going to go ahead and seal it using that same mold release agent. And all you got to do is apply one thin coat and then let it sit.
3 days later.
And after letting this sit for 3 days, we can go ahead and start taping everything off so we can get ready for cutting. Now I'm just going to go ahead and tape off the area just to give me something to follow with the saw. So I have some regular masking tape. I'm going to go ahead and just mask off the edges. That's pretty close to where the flange material started. And we'll go around. It doesn't have to be perfect. I'm just using this as a guide. And there we go. And that should finish it off right there. So now I'll go ahead and grab my trusty oscillating tool and see if I can cut along this taped edge. Now the good news is this cuts really well on fiberglass, but this will take a few minutes. Man, look at this mess. Well, looks like we got enough shaved off the sides. Let me go ahead and see if I can tip this over. And, man, this thing's got some weight to it. So now let's go ahead and start demolding it. We're going to remove the plug. We'll start with the flashing material. We'll get the flange out of the way. And this actually peels off pretty easy. This wasn't hard at all. And almost there. Came off in one strip. And now I'll grab my trim removal tools, and we'll see if we can start digging this out. Usually when you start breaking it loose, a lot of this will start popping right out. So I'll start by grabbing a few tools and start working my way around the edges. If you don't have a lot of these tools, you can use popsicle sticks as well. And I'll start working my way around little by little. And I think we got that side out. Let me see it pull a little harder. Yeah, there it goes. There's one side out. The fact I'm breaking this apart's no big deal. As long as the mold's done, I'm happy. And we'll see if we can get this other side. Probably one good pull right here. Yeah, there we go. There's the other side. In the center, look at that. Popped right out. Very nice. So far, this is looking really good. So now it's time to clean up our mold. We're going to start with some water. The reason we use water, because that green film we applied earlier dissolves in water. So it's usually good, just take a little bit of water and go ahead and start wiping it off. Now I'm using also a scorcher pad as well, because we have some of that clay and I want to go ahead and remove all that clay. The gel coat doesn't stick to it, but you still got to remove it. And I'm going to try to get as many spots as I can clean off as possible. There we go. We'll take a microfiber cloth and we'll see how it looks. Now looking at it from here, we did have a little damage, especially around the flange area. You can see some wrinkling. It looks like that's where it overheated at, especially against the aluminum flashing. But not to worry, I'm going to go ahead and start doing some mold repair. Now this is a little extensive, but I'm going to go ahead and go all out just because I have the time. I'm going to go ahead and start with some 400 grit sandpaper. I'm going to go ahead and smooth out every area that might be rough that just needs attention. And let's go ahead and pull out a sander for the flange, just to go ahead and speed this up. So now that we addressed all the sanding, let's go ahead and clean the mold. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some rubbing alcohol and a microfiber cloth. And I want to make sure I get all that dust and residue left behind. We want this thing as clean as possible. That way the new gel coat can go ahead and stick to it. And since we're only doing a little bit of mold repair, I'm going to go ahead and take one of our smaller cups. I'm probably going to use about maybe like 5 ounces of that same tooling gel coat as we used earlier. So go ahead and fill up that same cup. That looks pretty good. And now I'll go ahead and grab some wax and we can go ahead and add this to the gel coat. By adding wax, this thing should cure in normal air. So I'm going to add about 2% wax to this 5 ounces. And then we'll go ahead and mix that up for about 1 minute. Alright, that looks pretty good right there. And now we're at our 1.5% of catalyst or hardener. And then we'll mix that up for 1 minute. We always stir for 1 minute, but it is kind of runny. So the next thing we're going to add is this wet system. This is an adhesive filler. This is going to start thickening it up. Now this is kind of a trial and error thing as far as how thick you want it. So I'm going to put a nice spoonful right there and then start mixing this up. And this may take a second. And the more you mix, the thicker you get. So we'll add a little bit more. Think of like flour to a batter. The more flour you add, the thicker it gets. And this takes a second, so bear with me. So it's getting a little bit thicker. Not bad. Still a little runny. Let's do one more spoonful. And then we'll mix this up one more time. Starting to get pretty thick. Starting to get the consistency of body filler, which is really good. So looking at that, yeah, that's definitely a lot better. That we can work with. Alright, now let's go ahead and work our way back to the mold, and let's go ahead and start filling in all these little wrinkles that we had. And most of it's around the flange, which is okay, it's not really a big deal, but that's the area I still want to address. I want to make this as clean as possible. So I filled it in, and then I'm going to go ahead and take a plastic spreader just to flatten it out. Now another method to do this repair, instead of adding wax additive, you can actually use wax paper. Just go ahead and put your gel coat down and put the wax paper over it. It will not only flatten it out, but it will seal it. So that's a simple alternative. Now, since I mixed quite a bit of this gel coat, I'm just going to go apply in any area I see any imperfections whatsoever. Even if it's a little pinhole, I'm just going to apply it and I can just sand it out when I'm done.
8 hours later.
And it looks like our gel coat is dried, so let's go ahead and grab some 400 grit sandpaper and go ahead and sand out all the areas we gel coated. Now I just want to make sure it's nice and flat and clean, same as the rest of the mold. And it looks like we got all the imperfections out. So now let's go ahead and wet sand our mold. So we'll grab some 600 grit sandpaper and some water. We'll go ahead and douse everything down. And go ahead and douse down our sandpaper and sand everything down. We just want to get rid of all those little scratches as well as make this nice and pretty again. The whole idea is we're going to try to restore this shine. And it looks like the mold's starting to look pretty good again. Now let's go ahead and go to our 1500 grit sandpaper, do the same process, and then we'll go ahead and move to our 3000 grit sandpaper, and this should get rid of all those micro scratches. So it looks like our mold's turning out better and better, so now let's go ahead and give it a shine. So I'll grab some Meguiar's Ultimate Compound and an applicator pad, and we're going to go ahead and start polishing this mold. And I'm going to start circular motions and start really digging into it just to give that shine again. Now I'll do one small area at a time just so that way it doesn't dry out. Then I'll take my microfiber cloth and go ahead and wipe away all that compound. And you can see right there we're starting to get all that shine back. That's a great sign. And I'm going to repeat the same process for the rest of the mold. So now let's go ahead and take a step back and see what we got. So far this mold looks really good. It's got a great shine to it and the surface is extremely smooth. I'm definitely not worried about the discoloration. That is not important. All important is that the mold is smooth and that all your imperfections are gone. So now that our mold is complete, now we can make parts, which we'll see in the next video.